This lesson is about elatives in Arabic. In Arabic, that is a tafdil or sigat a tafdil. Elatives are comparative and superlative, in other words, the ER and EST of adjectives. The comparative is the ER form in English. It compares two things or two groups of things. The structure is a noun, then the elative form, min, and the other noun. The min is important. So, al-kitab atwal min al-majalla. The book is longer than the magazine. Okay? In modern Arabic, the elative form in a comparative construction is always masculine without regard to the genders of noun 1 and noun 2, and so no matter what noun 1 is, the elative form is akbar and not kubra, the feminine form. So two examples of the use of the comparative. هذا الطالب أطول من صديقه. This student is taller than his friend, notice the min. And هذه البنت أجمل من أخيها. This girl is more beautiful than her brother. Notice the min means than. The superlative, on the other hand, is the EST form in English. It singles out one thing from a group of things. There are two ways of doing the superlative in Arabic: the idafa method, which is more common and more normal, and the noun adjective phrase method, which is used but not as common. It's used more for set phrases and unusual expressions. There are two ways of doing the idafa method. The first way, you have an elative form in idafa with an indefinite singular noun. So an example would be Akbar Medina. Akbar Medina. The important thing to remember with this form is that even though the noun, the elative is first term of idafa, so it has no article. The noun is indefinite, so it has no article. But the meaning is the. So Akbar Medina means the biggest city. Okay? The second way of doing the elative is with a definite plural noun. Here you can have an optional min, then the elative form, and then a definite plural noun. And this means the biggest of the. So the min is optional, so you can say Akbar al-Mudun, biggest of the cities, or min Akbar al-Mudun. The min ahead of this form means one of. So min Akbar al-Mudun, one of the biggest of the cities. Now there's not a huge difference between Akbar Medina, the biggest city, and Akbar al-Mudun, the biggest of the cities, but they are different. They're not exactly the same. Again, the elative form in this construction is almost always masculine without regard to the gender of the nouns. However, a feminine form will occasionally occur in the second one, not in the first one. And so you could get Kubra al-Mudun instead of Akbar al-Mudun. And if you do get that feminine form, it has a slightly fusha'i feel. In other words, it's a little bit more elegant, a little bit more rare than the one with the masculine. Here are some examples of these, the two ways of doing the idafa form. So we have Atwal Talib. Remember, it means the, so the tallest student. Ajmal Bint, the most beautiful girl. Akbar Medina, the biggest city. On the other hand, we have Atwal At-Tullab, the biggest of, the tallest of the students. Ajmal al-Banat, the most beautiful of the girls, and Akbar al-Mudun, the biggest of the cities. If you stick min on the front of it, it's going to be one of. So min Atwal al-Tullab, one of the tallest students. Min Ajmal al-Banat, one of the most beautiful girls. Min Akbar al-Mudun, one of the biggest cities. And instead of saying Akbar in that last case, you could say Kubra al-Banat, the biggest of the girls. Akbar al-Banat, Kubra al-Banat. This one is slightly more elegant and definitely not as common. The noun adjective phrase method for the superlative is just a regular noun adjective phrase. The adjective often agrees with a feminine noun. It actually doesn't more often than not. So this is where you're going to get the feminine elative forms. There are a lot of masculine forms with feminine nouns, however, so it's not 100%. It doesn't always agree. This superlative noun adjective phrase method is very common with titles and names, and in that case, feminine agreement is really very common. when they are titles and names, they don't tend to have elative meanings, and so you get an elative form without the elative meaning. So, for instance, Baritania al-Uzma literally would mean something like the greatest Britain, but of course it just means Great Britain. It's an elative form with a non-elative meaning. So, just like any noun-adjective phrase, you're either going to get a definite noun with a definite elative after it, or an indefinite noun with an indefinite elative after it. So here are some examples of those. Al-Talib al-Akbar, the biggest or the oldest student. Al-Mushkila al-Kubra, the biggest problem. Alternatively, Al-Mushkila al-Akbar, the biggest problem. Both of these are used in regular newspapers. And the last example comes from a newspaper, Da'ira Ijtima'iyya Awsa, a wider social circle. This is just a real example of an indefinite noun-adjective phrase elative. Then we get these few titles or phrases or names which tend to have the feminine elative with the feminine noun. So we get Baritani al-Kubra, Great Britain, al-Usur al-Wusta, the Middle Ages. It looks like the middlest ages, but it's Middle Ages. And Mudiriyat Amman al-Kubra, the municipality of Greater Amman. To form elatives, you just get a regular adjective and put the three consonants into the pattern of the elative. So the masculine pattern is afmal or af'al in Arabic. The feminine pattern is fumla or I should have written thu'ala in Arabic, but I wrote fumla. Note that masculine elatives are diptotes, and feminine elatives are invariable. And so af'al is af'alun, not af'alun, and fumla is fumla. It never changes. It's not fumlan or anything like that. Notice that forming elatives like this is usually only possible with simple adjectives, and usually ones that are not originally participles. And so many adjectives in Arabic start out as participles, and many of those cannot form elatives. And participles and adjectives that don't form elatives do the ER and EST forms with the tamyiz construction. And you could look at the tamyiz lesson to get more about that. So, for example, you can see Kabir going to Akbar just by plugging in kaf, ba, and ra into the afmal pattern. And Kabir also going to Kubra by plugging in kaf, ba, ra into the fumla, thu'ala pattern. But you get a participle that is an adjective, muhtam, which is interested, okay, and it doesn't take an elative, okay. And so if you want to say an elative, an est or an er, you can say akthar ihtimaman, which is a tamyiz. Now there are other forms in Arabic which look a little bit like elatives and in some ways act like them. And so colors, especially the masculine colors, have something in common with elatives. Ahmar, akbar, they have the same pattern. They're both diptotes, but the feminine's different because the elative feminine is fumla and the color feminine is famla. Okay, so ahmar, hamra, but akbar, kubra. The word first and the word other, awwal and akhar, both also are considered to be elatives, and so you get a more or less feminine pattern, ula. That's actually where ula comes from, and ukhra as the feminine. And importantly, the word for first can be used in structures similar to the idafa method for regular elatives, which can be a little confusing at first, but once you realize it's an elative and it has st at least on the end anyway, it makes a little bit of sense. So you can have al-kitab al-awwal, which is just the noun-adjective phrase method, al-waraq al-ula, that's just a feminine version, but you can also say awwal kitab, and this is just like Akbar Medina. There's no article, but it means the first book. So this is awwal kitab is really just the superlative noun-adjective phrase with a singular indefinite noun that means definite, the first book. Another form that sometimes seems a little bit like an elative is the ma of amazement construction, the exclamatory ma. And so an example of that would be ma ajmal hadhihi al-bint, how beautiful that girl is. However, you need to remember that this is not actually an elative. Rather, the ajmal is considered to be a non-conjugated, conjugate for huwa, in other words, past tense form for verb. And this is proved by the fact that the word after, the bint, takes accusative, which is governed by the verb ajmala. So ma ajmala hadhil binta, if you're going to vowel it. It's a verb, but it feels for a lot of American students like an elative. So this page just gives a review of the things that tend to be stumbling blocks with elatives for English-speaking students. The first is that forgetting that forms like Akbar Medina mean the biggest city, even though there is no article. And remembering when you want to say the biggest city to not put an article. Don't say Al Akbar Medina. That's the temptation. The second thing is forgetting the difference between an elative with an indefinite singular noun and an elative with a definite plural noun. Remember, with an indefinite singular, it's Akbar Medina, the biggest city, but with a plural, it's Akbar al-Mudun, the biggest of the cities. And forgetting a difference between min between two nouns and min before an elative with a definite plural noun. So when you have a min between two nouns, you have a comparative. A talib akbar min a taliba. The male student is bigger than the female student. That's between two nouns. But when it's before this elative plus definite plural noun, min akbar al-mudun, it means one of. Okay, so one of the biggest of the cities. So on this last page, I have given you examples of most of the kinds of constructions I've talked about, real examples from the corpus. These are all from a single newspaper, Al-Ghad in Jordan, and I tried to stick to the same words as much as I could. I think in the last one I couldn't find one, so I had to find different words, but I'm using the biggest problem. So this is different ways that this particular newspaper in a single year said the biggest problem. Okay, so the first one has a noun-adjective phrase with the feminine elative form. So كانت المشكلة الكبرى هنا. So the biggest problem here, and then he's talking about, is represented by the constitutional status of the laws that the assembly passed once the assembly was later declared to be invalid. The next one says لكن المشكلة الأكبر في هذه المناطق هي ظروف العمل. So the biggest problem in these regions is working conditions. And notice that it's really the same. المشكلة الكبرى المشكلة الأكبر. It's just a choice. Now, as I said, in this particular paper, المشكلة الكبرى may be a tiny bit more common than المشكلة الأكبر, but they're both pretty common. There's quite a few examples of each. The next example is an example of the superlative with إضافة. So أكبر مشكلة تواجه العاملين في قتال المرأة. So the biggest problem, notice it means the biggest problem that faces workers in this field lies in the lack of national numbers, to compare with. And so again, the first three are all talking about the biggest problem, and they just made different choices in how to form that superlative. Okay. The next one is an example of the idafa with the definite plural instead of the indefinite singular, still meaning the biggest problem, but in this case it's the biggest of the problems. So he stressed that the issue of the working age of tourist cars, in other words, how long tourist cars last, يعتبر أكبر المشاكل التي تحدد قطاع التأجير. It is considered to be the biggest of the problems which threaten the rental sector. Okay? And the next one is similar, but it's with a min in front of it. So instead of meaning the biggest of the problems, it means one of the biggest of the problems. So يعد التسمم بالأدوية من أكبر المشاكل الصحية على مستوى العالمي. Okay, so medicinal poisoning, getting poisoned by your own medicines, is one of the biggest health problems on the international level. Okay, so you can see that every single one of these is talking about the biggest problem. The last two, the biggest of the problems, but they choose, like I say, this single newspaper shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways of doing it. The last example, I wanted to find an example of using the idafa with the feminine, and I couldn't find any examples of that with mushkila or mashakil, but I did find several with sharikat, so we'll see this one, the kubra sharikat, the biggest of the companies. Okay, let's look at the sentence. It says, this exhibition, okay, is one of the exhibitions which specialize in the sector, in the building and construction sector, which included, okay, الذي ضم it's talking about the exhibition included كبرى الشركات الأردنية في القطاع. Okay, the biggest of the Jordanian companies in that sector. Okay, so كبرى الشركات instead of أكبر الشركات, which would also have been fine. Okay, but كبرى الشركات, that particular phrase tends to be pretty common. So this is not, of course, a very difficult construction. You've had a lot of experience with it, but it's good to get an overall review of it so you can see that there is, quite a bit of variation. And if you just keep looking for the variation, you'll see examples of every single one of these constructions that you've learned about.